So what do you actually do when the US has to reach deep inside a peer adversary's backyard on the opening night of a fight? But every bomber either can't survive the trip in or can't carry enough to matter once it gets there. Early 2026 gave us one data point during Operation Epic Fury. American stealth aircraft spent weeks operating inside the detection envelopes of those Chinese-supplied YLC-8B UHF radars over Iran. They hit missile production facilities and air defense nodes and came back without a single loss to radar-guided surface-to-air missiles. That outcome wasn't just better tactics. It pointed to a real mismatch between what those sensors could spot on a scope and what they could actually hold on to long enough to guide an interceptor. For 20 years, the Pentagon's answer to contested airspace was pretty straightforward. Stay outside the threat ring, keep the bombers hundreds of miles back, and fire long-range cruise missiles. The idea looked clean on a slide. If the aircraft never crosses into the engagement envelope, it can't be shot down. Here's the thing though, that solution stretched the kill chain until it was basically held together with hope and good weather. Targeting relied on satellites and tankers that an adversary could jam or simply remove from the equation. The missiles themselves carried warheads that were too light for deeply buried command centers or hardened silos. Once the first wave of ballistic missiles turned the forward bases into craters, the standoff force often found itself with no practical way to finish the job. It's like trying to fight a fire from 3 blocks away with a garden hose while someone keeps cutting the water main. You can see the smoke, but you're not actually putting anything out. The B-2 Spirit showed the exact opposite problem. Its stealth held up fine, but the aircraft turned out to be too fragile and wildly expensive to keep in any real quantity. Once the price climbed past $2 billion a copy, Congress stepped in and limited the whole fleet to 21 aircraft. In any sustained fight against China, those 21 bombers would run out of usable sorties before the first week was even over. What the service actually needed was mass. The ability to operate inside the threat ring, and the kind of persistence that lets you keep coming back. Nothing flying at the time could deliver all three together. I've sat through enough of those war games to see the pattern repeat. A standoff force could chip away at the outer defenses, but it rarely managed to track and hit mobile transporter, erector launchers, or crack open the hardened sites, protecting an adversary's most important systems. The moment integrated air defenses came online and started jamming GPS and satellite links, the long-range shooters basically lost their eyes. The bombers that could reach the targets couldn't survive the approach. The bombers that could survive the approach couldn't get there in the numbers that counted. This wasn't some short-term shortfall, it was a built-in flaw in how strategic bombing had been structured for years. The Air Force simply couldn't generate enough strikes to blunt a fast Chinese move against Taiwan, when the only real choices were missiles fired from outside the threat ring or a handful of ultra-expensive stealth platforms that nobody wanted to risk in high-tempo operations. The B-21 Raider was built to plug that exact hole. It wasn't pitched as a straight replacement for what came before. Instead, the whole point was to make it the core of a fresh, long-range strike setup, one that could actually live inside contested airspace for weeks instead of hours, hunt targets with its own sensors, and put real ordnance on the target while staying survivable. The interesting part is how it gets there, and that starts with the airplane's bones, where the B-21 really parts company with everything before it is. By solving survivability inside the airframe itself, rather than depending on coatings that need constant upkeep. The older stealth jets, the F-117 and the B-2, leaned on radar-absorbent material laid down as tape and paint. Those layers would break down from friction, heat, moisture, sunlight, the usual stuff. Keeping them working meant climate-controlled hangars, thousands of hours of work after almost every flight, and strict limits on where you could even leave the plane. The B-21 drops the surface coatings completely. Automated robots lay continuous carbon fiber tapes mixed with radar-absorbent material straight into the load-bearing composite structure. You get this seamless outer skin with none of the seams or edges that tend to give radar a place to bounce. When a radar wave hits the aircraft, it goes through a dielectric outer layer and into a matrix of conductive fillers and hollow ceramic microspheres inside the composite. The material starts oscillating and turns that energy into ordinary heat through internal friction. The plane doesn't reflect the wave back, it just absorbs and dissipates it. This isn't another coat of better paint. It's a shift from trying to reflect radar away to actually soaking it up inside the structure. The exhaust follows the same logic. The B-2 used a sawtooth, trailing edge to try masking the heat. The B-21 moves the outlets forward on the upper fuselage and shapes them as a straight inverse W secondary air mixes in before the plume flows over an aft deck, protected by advanced ceramic composites. The exhaust cools fast enough that rear hemisphere infrared sensors have a lot less to grab onto. These choices change the day-to-day reality in a hurry. The B-2 needs those expensive hangars to stop its coatings from degrading in rain or sun. The B-21's built-in structure lets it sit on open tarmac or under a simple awning at some forward Pacific spot without losing performance. The ground support footprint shrinks by roughly 30%. Forward squadrons no longer depend on massive fixed buildings that are easy to target. Maintenance drops something like 40% per flight hour because crews aren't spending days restoring tape and paint after every mission. That means higher sortie rates from scattered locations, which is what actually delivers the massive fires inside contested airspace. Without durable, low-maintenance stealth baked in, the rest of the persistent stand-in concept would have stayed on the drawing board. The second big piece is the part you don't see from the outside. Every B-21 flies with its own cloud-based digital twin that stays in constant contact with the aircraft's sensors. Over at Tinker, sustainment teams can watch component wear in real time and 3D print replacements before the jet even lands. What matters more is the open mission systems approach. New radar modes, electronic warfare tactics, and weapon software drop in as simple updates instead of waiting years for a depot overhaul. A B-21 that rolls out of Palmdale in 2027 will look pretty much the same in 2035 from the outside, but its actual capabilities will keep shifting through code. That combination of rock-solid physical stealth and non-stop software changes flips the Defender's problem on its head. An adversary can't just figure out how to beat today's B-21 and call it good. The plane keeps learning and adapting faster than any hardware cycle ever allowed. At the same time, the low-maintenance airframe removes the old bottleneck that made commanders nervous about risking stealth jets too often. The B-21 can fly more, from more places, with less fuss, and still keep its low observable edge. The real shift shows up when you look at how the Air Force actually plans to use it. For years, the default move was to stay outside the threat ring and lob standoff weapons. The B-21 turns that logic around, because it can operate inside contested airspace with acceptable risk. It shortens the kill chain in a big way. It doesn't have to wait for off-board sensors that might get jammed or shot down. Its own sensor fusion lets it find, sort out, and hit mobile targets like transporter erector launchers with gravity bombs or small diameter bombs dropped right overhead. You get the heavier warhead effect that standoff missiles often miss. This stand-in approach also opens the door to pulsed operations. A few B-21s, each running a handful of collaborative combat aircraft, can punch temporary holes through an integrated air defense network. The CCAs go out front to jam radars, act as decoys, or draw fire while the bomber stays quiet. Non-stealth aircraft can then slip through during that brief window. The corridor doesn't need to stay open for hours, just long enough for the ordnance to get through. The B-21 supplies the staying power and battle management that makes these coordinated pulses work in practice. None of this exists in a vacuum. The durable stealth and the evolving software are there to support one specific way of fighting: staying inside contested airspace for the long haul, finding targets with its own systems, delivering serious ordnance, and running unmanned teammates without giving away the bomber's position. That is what pushes every other military to rethink how they set up their air defenses and how much risk they're willing to accept when they think about quick moves on territory. The B-21 isn't just a tougher version of the old bombers. It's the first one actually sized and built to turn sustained, high-volume strikes inside defended airspace into something planners can count on instead of treating like a last resort. That changes the strategic math, because it undercuts the idea that an adversary can pull off a quick fait accompli before real American air power shows up. Chinese planning has leaned hard on keeping carrier groups and shorter-range fighters at a distance with ballistic missiles and layered defenses. A fleet of 100 or more B-21s operating from Guam, Diego Garcia, or even the continental United States can put serious conventional strikes deep into the Chinese mainland on night one. Leadership targets, command nodes, and anti-ship sites stay under continuous pressure without needing forward bases that can be hit first. This flips the cost-exchange picture that has shaped Indo-Pacific wargaming for the past decade. Standoff weapons demand large numbers of expensive missiles to get equivalent effects against hardened targets. The B-21 can deliver gravity ordnance or massive ordnance penetrators right over the objective after it gets through the defenses. A single aircraft with a 30,000-pound GBU-57 can do what multiple salvos of cruise missiles might not manage against deeply buried facilities. Time and money both get squeezed in the opening phase. The nuclear side picks up similar flexibility. The B-21 becomes the air-breathing leg of the updated triad alongside the Sentinel and the Columbia-class subs. It gives a recallable, visible deterrent that fixed silos and submerged boats can't match the same way. An adversary weighing a first strike now has to account for a bomber force that can be generated, spread across multiple bases, and held on alert in ways that complicate preemptive targeting. The LRSO cruise missile ties the B-21 to the modernized B-52J, so both platforms can run the same nuclear profiles while the B-21 handles the penetrating role and the B-52 stays outside as a big standoff asset. Real-world results from 2026 already back up the survivability premise. During Operation Epic Fury, stealth platforms operated persistently inside the engagement zones of those Chinese YLC-8B UHF radars without giving up weapons quality tracks. Lower frequency radars can create intermittent anomalies on a screen, but they lack the resolution needed for continuous missile guidance. The B-21's smaller, more refined broadband signature and frequency-selective surfaces widen that margin further. Adversaries might detect something unusual, yet they still struggle to turn that detection into a reliable intercept. Production constraints are the part that always looks cleaner on a slide than it does on the factory floor. The Air Force is spending $1.7 billion on life extension programs for the B-1B and B-2 fleets to keep a dangerous capacity gap from opening before the B-21 reaches meaningful numbers in the early 2030s. Pushing annual output up to 15 or 20 aircraft runs straight into supply chain bottlenecks in specialized composites and a shortage of cleared workers. Industry analysts keep saying that simply adding more funding won't fix the problem overnight. The whole effort needs steady political backing and disciplined execution from the industrial side through the rest of the decade. The two-pilot crew choice shows the same kind of realism. The mental workload of running deep penetration missions while managing multi-domain battle is more than one person can reliably carry. The Air Force is already moving experienced weapons system officers into the pilot pipeline to hold onto the targeting skills this mission demands. Unmanned operations are still the long-term goal, but current requirements keep the airplane manned for the foreseeable future. All of this adds up to a platform built for sustained conventional campaigns rather than occasional high-risk raids. The B-21 is not a silver bullet asset like the B-2, it is engineered for mass and persistence. A fleet of 145 aircraft gives the minimum needed to keep continuous pressure on an adversary while still covering nuclear alert duties and watching secondary theaters. That mass shifts the deterrence equation from episodic shows of capability to constant risk and adversary. The doctrinal implication is what really forces the rethink. Air defense planners can no longer assume standoff weapons will remain the main long-range strike tool. They have to account for an attacker that can penetrate, loiter, and strike repeatedly from inside the defended zone while directing unmanned systems to suppress or absorb defensive fire. That shift pushes investment towards sensor networks, command systems, and mobile launchers that used to sit lower on the priority list. The B-21 does not need to stay invisible against every future sensor. It only needs to remain credible longer than any current or near-term countermeasure can reliably defeat it. The B-21 therefore forces a 30-year recalibration of air defense investment and operational planning across every major military. Adversaries now have to weigh the real cost of fielding denser, more sophisticated sensor networks against the hard fact that low-frequency radars alone cannot generate reliable intercept solutions against a platform built for broadband absorption and continuous software adaptation. They must also plan for an attacker that can generate sorties from austere, dispersed locations rather than predictable large bases. This dispersal approach raises the cost, time, and uncertainty required to suppress air operations, as noted in analyses of Agile Combat Employment (ACE) doctrine. According to Air and Space Forces magazine, the Air Force is actively refining prepositioning of materiel and passive defenses like camouflage and hardened shelters to support operations from smaller, forward locations. The geographic sanctuary that once protected rear area command nodes and missile garrisons shrinks dramatically when a penetrating bomber can reach them from outside the immediate theater without relying on vulnerable tanker support. Future sensor developments will narrow the margin over time. Multi-static passive networks, quantum radar concepts, and advanced acoustic tracking represent genuine long-term threats. None of these systems yet exist at operational scale, and each carries its own engineering and cost constraints. The B-21 program assumes that software evolution and operational tactics will outpace these developments for the life of the fleet, yet that assumption requires continuous validation through testing and intelligence assessment. The margin is real today. It is not guaranteed forever. The same realism applies to production. The Air Force has accepted the necessity of extending the B-1B and B-2 fleets at significant cost precisely because the B-21 production rate cannot instantly replace existing capacity. Supply chain fragility in specialized composites and the limited pool of cleared manufacturing personnel remain binding constraints. A fleet of 145 aircraft represents the minimum required to sustain both conventional pressure in the Indo-Pacific and nuclear alert commitments. Anything less recreates the silver bullet problem that limited the B-2. The program succeeds only if industrial capacity scales with strategic demand. The viewer who has followed this architecture now possesses a complete mental model. Strategic bombing is no longer a choice between fragile penetration with insufficient mass or safe standoff with insufficient effect. The B-21 creates a third option: persistent, survivable presence inside contested airspace that can locate targets organically, deliver massive ordnance directly, and orchestrate supporting unmanned systems without revealing its own position. That option changes the timing, geometry, and cost of any campaign an adversary might contemplate in the Western Pacific. It also changes the deterrence calculation for the nuclear triad by adding a recallable, visible leg that complicates first strike planning. The aircraft does not eliminate risk. It does not guarantee victory. It does not render every other platform obsolete. It does restore the ability to conduct sustained, high-volume, long-range strikes against a peer adversary that has spent 2 decades optimizing its defenses against the previous American way of war. That restoration is the central fact that will shape air power doctrine, basing decisions, and great power competition for the next 3 decades. Sources cited include Air and Space Forces magazine on ACE and dispersed basing, War on the Rocks on missile campaigns and adaptation in Ukraine, and official USAF Doctrine Note 121 on Agile Combat Employment.